Hello. I just finished watching Vivo, a new movie released on Netflix from Sony and Columbia. When I've just watched the movie and I'm talking about it, I never want to call it a full review because recency bias is a big thing, and I think it would take a lot of time to sit with a particular movie or a show to give a true review, quote unquote, so I'm not going to call this that. But I definitely have some thoughts on Vivo, and I figured I may as well share them with folks on the internet in case they see this pop up on their Netflix and wonder whether it's worth checking out. So some quick background. This is a movie based in Cuban musical traditions, or at least that's what it's trying to do. I'm definitely not qualified to assess whether it's accurate in its depictions of Cuban music traditions and all that kind of stuff, or whether it gives a sort of an accurate representation of that musical history. But beyond that, it had some star power by way of Lin-Manuel Miranda, who plays the title character, Vivo, who's a little Kinkajou monkey who for a while performs with this old guy in Havana, and then, long story short, has to travel to Miami for musical reasons. I'm trying not to spoil too much about the story, although you can get a lot of it from the trailer. Overall, my real quick take, basically, I think it's a completely serviceable movie musical that, in a lot of ways, feels like many CG off-brand feature films meant for children and families. And in terms of audience, I'll say right away that it doesn't really fall into the category of adult-friendly animation, where if you're over the age of like 16, unless you're really into the music and the story, the really basic story for some reason, it's probably not going to be for you. And as for whether kids will dig it, it's up to them, I guess. I'm pretty bad at trying to guess whether young children will like a movie or a show or not. I have a feeling that they'll be into a good number of the songs. There are a couple good comedy moments, I thought. Although I think no matter what your age is, I think your enjoyment of the movie also hinges pretty heavily on how you feel about the lead human character, who is a little girl named Gabby Hernandez, I guess. She's Cuban-American. Her parents have a connection to Cuba. That character we'll be talking a little bit more about the ramifications of her character later on in the video. Right up front, they make her obnoxious. She has purple hair, so you know she's crazy and not like the other girls. In fact, I think she says basically that exact line in her big song. She's designed to be like annoying and obnoxious, which is supposed to tie into the movie's theme and messaging, but just on the surface level, if you don't like that character, I feel like you're gonna have a kind of a tough time just watching the whole thing, because she is in a lot of it, and she's not mean-spirited, which is good. That's usually a good trait for a lead in a children's movie. But yeah, if she doesn't click with you, it's gonna be tricky. Yeah, Lin-Manuel, I mean, he's doing the Lin-Manuel thing. Yeah, the aspect ratio, even just in its aspect ratio, it's clear that the movie is trying to, that alone kind of confirms that this was meant to be a theatrical release. I haven't seen that in the research. I don't know whether that's true or not, but it does feel like it was something that was meant to be released in theaters. They eventually said, no, it's probably not the right call, so we're just going to dump it straight to Netflix. Obviously, Sony did the same thing with Mitchell's versus the Machines. But yeah, this has the cinematic, I think it's a letterbox aspect ratio. I don't have the exact specs, but it sure does seem that way. They're trying to make this a somewhat prestige release, I guess, or they really want people to take it seriously, is the impression that I get from the presentation of the movie. In terms of the animation itself, for color palette specifically, it follows in the vein of just the standard thing for children's animation for years and years now, where everything is overblown, everything is oversaturated, and loud colors all over the place. Don't necessarily have a problem with that overall, but it certainly doesn't help distinguish this movie from other contemporary children's animation. There's a 2D, or at least 2D inspired animation sequence pretty early on. That was pretty neat. I liked that sequence okay. Other than that, the animation it's very good on the technical level. The lighting can be quite nice. The character designs are mostly interesting. going usually more for the animal characters than anything else. What is it with Sony CG movies and how all the extras, the NPCs as it were, are just so boring and bland, and it seems like they've been using basically the same background characters since like Cloudy with the Chance of Meatballs. Do they just have an asset pool that they take from for every single one of their movies, even if though they're in completely different settings? I don't know. There were a couple of background characters that had distinctive faces and designs, but everyone else just seems like bargain bin action figures to me. That's the animation side of things. I really don't have too much else to say about the visuals. It's mostly what you would expect. The trailer also gives you a pretty good idea of the range of visuals that you'll get in this movie. It's not a huge range overall. Musical theater structure, yeah, you have the I Want song, you have the opening number that kind of gives you exposition and puts you into the world of the movie and does some characterization stuff. You set off on the adventure, and then of course there's this sort of music is the most powerful thing, and this one song is the goal. This is why we're doing any of this. It's sort of ironic then that the one big song that the movie revolves around ends up being just completely mediocre in its performance and arrangement. Like, it seems like an odd choice. I think they were trying to blend, like, okay, Gabby represents the young people music, or what filmmakers think is, the young people music, and then Vivo, the monkey, represents the more traditional classical Cuban approach, I guess, to the song, and it just ends up being really bland. That ending song, yeah. Or not the final song, but the what's supposed to be the showstopper, I assume. The movie did remind me a lot of Up. Remember Up from 12, 13 years ago? You have it's a very basic, it's a very traditional story structure of we have to get to the place with the thing, and there's going to be a lot of interruptions along the way. I mean, that story structure basically goes back to Odysseus. So there's certainly not bringing anything new to the table in terms of storytelling or structure. Visuals arguably are just what you would expect for our time, or even 5 or 6 years ago. They don't exactly seem like cutting edge visuals. The film score, not the songs that'll end up on the soundtrack, but the film score itself is extremely traditional, and not just in the sense of traditional orchestration, but also in terms of what you would expect from an animation film score. Very bland, don't need to talk about that anymore. What else? Yeah, the director here, Kirk D'Amico, something like that. I decided to look him up on IMDb, and interestingly, he didn't study film. He went to USC, he didn't study film. He ended up doing some journalism related to the film industry in Italy for a while. But his other two directing credits are The Croods and Space Chimps. Remember Space Chimps? The co-director is mostly an art department animation guy. This is apparently his first director credit. And the writer, sorry I don't have all their names written down here, but the writer is a Broadway pro. I'm pretty sure that she created or wrote the book for the original stage version of In the Heights. So that's a pretty darn big credit. That is certainly bringing a lot to the table in terms of working on a movie musical. So that seems like the one role on the high creative team that actually was very fitting. I don't know, that's just my impression. So now we'll get down to brass tacks, and I'll very briefly talk about what I see as the movie's messaging and kind of moral and overall theme. What I think is the actual theme and messaging that the movie is delivering just on a surface level. This isn't interpretation so much, this is just what the movie is giving me. It just seems to be really basic, simplified, personal empowerment stuff. The moral really does seem to be express yourself and be loud, be who you are, which is fine, but we've had so much of that since the 90s without elaboration that I'm not super impressed when that ends up being the focus of your movie. Is it still relevant? Sure. I'm sure it still speaks to people, and specifically with the character of Gabby, maybe there are lots of kids out there who suddenly feel seen in some way because of Gabby, and if that's the case, that's awesome. Good job, guys. However, there was a moment where I felt like the movie was going for something a little bit deeper, and I'll explain why in the end I don't think it was actually trying to communicate that. I think I was over-reading, but here is my little theory. So we have this character of Gabby, and she's loud and weird, and she has purple hair, and she likes music. That's her thing, and she's not good at making friends, apparently, and, she's kind of an outsider. She wants to do her own thing. She has a whole song about going to the beat of her own drum. Get it? But, it's literally drums, because her dead dad did drums, I guess. So that's fine. The way that they represent her inability to integrate and become friends with other kids is they have these like Girl Scout characters who are essentially saying, hey, you have to be in uniform and you have to join up with us. You have to conform in order to participate in what we're doing here. So it definitely works on the level of, oh, she's a lone wolf and she doesn't want to make friends, or she's too afraid to make friends, or she doesn't want to have to give up who she is in order to make friends. Okay, cool. And so from that, I kind of got a whiff of like that maybe they're trying to comment on cultural assimilation, especially like post-immigration. I think that would be a really interesting topic for a movie that seems to focus so much on Cuban culture and then Cuban American culture, maintaining a sense of cultural identity in a much broader American cultural landscape. And so I thought, okay, maybe Gabby's story and her personality and the friction between her and the other like very typically American children is that, okay, maybe this is like microcosm thing. This is trying to say something about cultural assimilation and how, no, you don't have to give up who you are already, and you don't have to give up your own cultural identity in order to belong. And I thought that would be really cool. I think that would fit the subject matter of the movie really well. However, upon closer inspection, I think I'm maybe reaching there a little bit. And the reason that I think I'm reaching is because, I don't know, it's tough to say, but like it doesn't feel like they're trying to make Gabby represent a strong connection to Cuban culture. I don't get that sense. I mean, certainly part of her identity is as a Cuban American person, but I don't get the sense that it seems more than anything that the movie's trying to say, you don't have to give up your individual identity. Individualism, everything. This is a very American move to just say the most important thing is who you are as an individual, and your individual self is the most important thing. And that's not the same thing as talking about cultural assimilation. I don't think they did enough to establish that Gabby was specifically struggling with attempts to rob her of that cultural identity. I don't think that's actually there. Maybe they tried to put it in there and it just didn't happen. Maybe they never intended for that to be in the movie. But yeah, it just seemed to land on, no, just be yourself, be loud, express yourself. Again, which is fine, but it's nowhere near as interesting to me as a potential discussion about the cultural side of things. And if anything, every time that Gabby or anyone else tries to bring like a Cuban sensibility to music or something, or perform on the street literally, there's never any resistance. There's never anybody saying, oh, this is weird. I mean, they're in Florida after all. Like there isn't exactly a huge cultural divide there. At the same time, when I was still reading my cultural assimilation thing into this movie, I was viewing the Girl Scout kids as de facto representatives of the dominant cultural forces in the United States. Again, I'm probably reaching here, but I thought that they could play that role, right? Not just in the sense of, hey, wear this uniform, do what we tell you to do, or else you don't fit in. That would have maybe worked really well if all of the cookie sales girls were just white. Maybe this would have felt a bit too edgy for the kids movie that they wanted to make, but like if all the Girl Scout kids were white and blonde and sort of European looks and everything, maybe it would have felt more strongly like, oh, okay, here's a symbolic reference to the forces that any kid with a strong cultural identity outside of the cultural norms of the United States, meaning white European dominant culture stuff, they're going to have a tough time, whether it's in school or just social settings. But of course, I'm sure they looked at those three kids and they said, well, there's got to be diversity here. So there's racial diversity within the Girl Scout kids. And so as a result, I don't feel like if they already are open to, I don't know, I think it just falls apart, in other words. I think my slightly interesting interpretation of the movie's messaging about cultural assimilation, I don't think it holds up under scrutiny, and so I was left with messaging that was much simpler and much less interesting to me. But that's really my last big point about the movie. The surface level stuff is pretty mediocre in my eyes. Whether or not kids will like it, I have no idea. I hope that a decent amount of kids like it. I'm sure it'll do just fine. It certainly seems like a it had a decent budget and everything. And the performances were all fine, I thought. No one stood out as bad or miscast. The songs were mostly fun and upbeat and interesting, sort of. Although there was it seemed like there was a lot of pitch correction to the vocals in this movie. Sometimes it really stood out as fake. But I think I think I need to get out of here. Hope you enjoyed, but please let me know what you thought about the movie, and thanks for stopping by.